Hello everyone, so today's video is going to be a little bit different than my usual voiceover content because I've thought it was about time for a few days now that I sit down and get all my thoughts out on the official Pretty Little Liars reboot. And I'm making air quotes as I say that because I don't really consider this to be a reboot, and you'll find out in a few minutes why I feel that way. But first, for those of you who don't know, about 3-4 weeks ago, the Riverdale creator, Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, the showrunner and head writer of Riverdale, announced his intention of creating a Pretty Little Liars reboot. And that was all the details that we got until, I think it was 4 days ago, 3-4 days ago. HBO Max, which is Warner Brothers' newly released streaming service, announced that they are officially picking up the reboot. It is, I think it's got a 10-episode green light for season 1. It's called Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, and here is the synopsis before I get into my actual thoughts on it. 20 years ago, a series of tragic events almost ripped the blue-collar town of Millwood apart. Now, in the present day, a group of disparate teenage girls, a brand new set of little liars, find themselves tormented by an unknown assailant and made to pay for the secret sin their parents committed 2 decades ago, as well as their own. In the dark, coming-of-rage, horror-tinged drama, Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, we find ourselves miles away from Rosewood, but within the existing Pretty Little Liars universe, in a brand new town with a new generation of liars. And that's pretty much all we know. We don't know when the show's coming, we don't know who's been cast in it. All we know is that Roberto is the showrunner, the head writer on it, and that it will be on HBO Max at some point in the future, and that it takes place in the same universe as Pretty Little Liars. Now, the first thing that came to mind when I first read this announcement and read the actual synopsis is that this doesn't actually sound like a reboot. In fact, it sounds like it has very little, if anything, to do with the original PLL. When this announcement was first made a couple weeks ago, I think most of the fandom was under the impression that it was going to be an actual reboot, that we were going to be getting a new Aria, Emily, Hannah, Spencer, Allison, and most, if not all, of the other characters, that maybe some side characters would be changed, maybe some love interests, but that it was going to be a new version of Pretty Little Liars. But in reality, it sounds like it has nothing to do with it. I know a lot of people, even after this show was announced, were speculating that it was going to be a prequel focusing on the parents, or that it was going to be a continuation of Addison's storyline. Remember that girl who disappeared at the end of the Pretty Little Liars finale? But I think that the synopsis makes it pretty clear that that's not the case. I mean, it says it's in a totally different town. It's across the country from Rosewood. It has nothing to do with PLL. And in fact, reading this synopsis, it kind of sounds a little bit more like a Riverdale plot to me than anything else. Now, I will say, I stopped watching Riverdale, I want to say it was in season 2. The last episode that I watched, actually as it aired, was the Heathers episode. I've since gone back and rewatched the episode about Fred's death, just because I did love Luke Perry and I wanted to see how they honored him on the show. But yeah, I stopped after the Heathers episode and I really wasn't enjoying it up until that point for a while. But the last storyline I really remember was that whole Dungeons and Dragon-esque board game cult thing that we found out the parents had been playing, and then it kind of comes back and starts wrapping up the kids as well and getting them involved in it. And to me, this sounds kind of exactly like this is, where the parents of these girls committed some sin, and now that's kind of making a return and affecting their lives. So yeah, I mean, to me, this sounds a lot less like a Pretty Little Liars story. It just kind of sounds like they're tying in the A moniker, and it sounds a lot more like the Riverdale plot. So with that said, the use of the term Pretty Little Liars in the title, it's not just called Original Sin, it's called Pretty Little Liars Original Sin. It just feels tacky to me. It feels a little bit trashy to be using the name in the title. And that's kind of my first overall thought on this. It just seems like it's not the same characters, it's not the same town, and really aside from A, and we know there's going to be some sort of A figure because the promotional images and the little video they sent out to announce the show did use A. I think it's something like, everything is not what it seems, A, or something like that. So there is going to be some A figure, but aside from that, it just kind of feels like they're tacking Pretty Little Liars into the title to try to draw in fans and capitalize on the show's success, and that just seems really trashy to me. It just feels tacky. That said, I do want to get into a little bit the response from the original members of PLL, the showrunner, the writers, the cast, and how they've been responding to this. We haven't seen a whole lot. Most vocally, the response has come from Marlene King, the showrunner and the head writer of the original Pretty Little Liars television show. She has tweeted pretty vocally about also feeling that this is a tacky move and talking about how, their footprints are basically still wet. They haven't let this show, it's only been 3 years. They haven't given this show time to actually kind of die off in the way that TV shows do. The rest of the cast, a lot of them have unfollowed the actual official Pretty Little Liars Instagram account. None of them have actually said anything. Marlene's really been the only one to. I know people have their own thoughts and opinions on the response of the cast, and especially Marlene. I know this is a controversial opinion, but it seems a little unprofessional to me. I mean, she obviously has every right to feel however she feels. She's entitled to her own opinions as the showrunner of the original show, but I just feel like she's being a little petty. I feel like she's kind of claiming ownership over something that she doesn't own. And when it comes down to it, Marlene had her chance. She had 2 spin-offs. Ravenswood back in 2014 that lasted 1 season, and The Perfectionists just last year that lasted 1 season. So the way I kind of see it is she had her chance to make a PLL spin-off to continue this world, and she failed, and she lost her opportunity. And as much as I understand her upset and her kind of feeling that this is kind of stomping on her grounds, she doesn't own the PLL brand. The person who comes closest to owning the PLL brand is Sarah Shepard, the author of the PLL books, and even that's questionable because I think this is a little known fact, but Sarah Shepard didn't just come up with the idea for the Pretty Little Liars book series all on her own. The idea was come up with by Alloy Entertainment, and Sarah Shepard was actually a ghostwriter for that company. And they brought her on to write the books with the intention of turning it into a television show. That was the intention all along, for it to be this hit TV show. It was supposed to happen in 2005. The network that it was supposed to be on ended up going under, so it had to wait a few more years. But that said, I mean, the characters, the world, the story, the plot, that belongs first and foremost to Sarah Shepard, who has publicly given her support and her blessing for this. Of course, she's making money off of it. But this show is not Marlene's to own. She doesn't own the Pretty Little Liars brand. She doesn't own the Pretty Little Liars name. So while I understand her kind of feeling resentful and feeling like maybe it's taking away from what she did, I do feel like her public response to it is a little bit unprofessional and a little bit petty. And this kind of goes to the fan reaction too. My opinion on this is that you can have whatever feelings you want on it, but this doesn't take away from the original show. It's not disrespectful to the creator. It's not disrespectful to the cast. This is a totally separate and independent show, and it does nothing to take away from the Pretty Little Liars that we all know and love. Now, the next thing that I want to get into, and this is verging more into the territory of theory than anything else, and I want to give that disclaimer first and foremost. This is not a confirmation. This is something that I've speculated. This is something that I've seen speculated on by other people in the fandom, but it is nothing more than that. Do not run with this. I do wonder if there is some connection between the cancellation of The Perfectionists and the announcement of this reboot. I remember back last year when the spinoff was canceled. It was weird. I think we can all say that the whole circumstances surrounding the show's cancellation, that long wait, the fact that Freeform had their big upfronts, there was no announcement, no word said about the show being renewed or canceled, months passed after the finale, everybody was wondering, Marlene seemed really optimistic, the writers seemed really optimistic, they gave their season 2 pitch, and then all of a sudden, so many months later, it was canceled with absolutely no fanfare. It was weird. It was weird right from the start. It's felt kind of weird the whole time. Even the fact that while the show was airing, it received very little promotion from the network. It almost seemed like they just didn't really care about it. I remember there was speculation even at the time that we were in that limbo, and especially when it was abruptly canceled. That was around the time that HBO Max was still in creation. It was still being worked on. It had been announced, but it wasn't up and running yet. That there was some sort of dispute between the fact that Pretty Little Liars is owned by Warner Brothers, who also owns HBO Max, but that the rights to air it were given to Disney, who owns the Freeform network. I remember there being a lot of speculation on whether that could have been some dispute over that as this new streaming service was getting ready to launch. And this just adds to that curiosity and that speculation to me. I just feel like there is a possibility that as They were discussing whether to renew The Perfectionists, whether to cancel it. They were also thinking about this reboot. Shows aren't born in a day. There is no way that the first time anybody thought of this reboot was 3 weeks ago when Roberto announced his intention. This show has been in the works for quite a while. I think the odds are fairly good that even last year, this show was in the works and this show was being talked about. So I think there is a distinct possibility that basically they chose this reboot to air on HBO Max over a season 2 of The Perfectionists. So again, that's all speculation. I don't really have a conclusion to that theory, but just take that for what you will. Now, the last thing I want to get into really quickly is kind of how most of my videos like this seem to end and where they seem to go to, which is the fan base and the reaction from the fan base. I get that this is a big dramatic announcement. I get that this is a big news one way or another to the fandom, but I will say that over the past few days, whether it's on social media, Twitter, Instagram, or on YouTube or on Reddit, I have seen so much vitriol from fans, especially from fans who are totally opposed to this reboot. I've seen people attacking anyone who's excited for it, or anyone who doesn't think it's a bad idea, anyone who doesn't think that it's disrespectful to Marlene and the original cast. I've seen people being called fake fans because they're excited for this reboot and they think both shows can exist simultaneously. And it's just been a little bit disappointing for me to see, and it reminds me a lot of some previous incidents and some previous times in the PLL fandom's history. And my opinion on all of it is that everyone is entitled to their own opinion. If you think that this show, this reboot, is disrespectful to the original PLL, if you think that it's an insult to Marlene Kane and the original cast, I might not agree with you, but you are totally entitled to that opinion. However, you are not entitled to blast other people for having their opinions, to call them fake fans, or tell them that they're not real fans of the show, or they can't love PLL if they're excited for this reboot as well. You need to let people have their opinions, and I realize that a lot of the people acting this way are kids themselves, and still have a lot of growing up to do. But as you get older, you realize that people can have their opinions, and just because somebody doesn't agree with you, it doesn't mean that they're wrong, it doesn't mean that they're stupid, it doesn't mean that their opinion is any less valid as yours. And really, if this reboot ends up going ahead, getting the green light and producing its first season, if you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. You don't have to accept this show as part of the Pretty Little Liars universe or canon or whatever. Just like with The Perfectionists, I saw the same kind of vitriol and anger when that show was going on, when Emerson was getting divorced. Same kind of thing. If you want to pretend that Pretty Little Liars ended with the Alex reveal and Addison disappearing from the barn, you're entitled to that. Go right ahead. This show doesn't have to change that. I've also seen a lot of people claiming that because of this reboot, that makes it unlikely or even impossible that they're going to be able to do a movie or a reunion with the original cast. I don't know if people are just using that as an excuse to hate on the reboot or what, because that doesn't even make sense. There's no reason why the original cast can't get together, which hasn't even ever been discussed. A movie or a reunion, that's never been a thing, that's never been a reality. That's just what people are hoping for down the road, and it probably wouldn't even happen for several more years at least. But there's no reason this reboot, which again, totally different characters, totally different setting, and totally different plot, that has nothing to do with that. There's nothing that would prevent a reunion. So that was just kind of all my thoughts on the matter. When it comes down to it, my perspective is I'm going to give it a chance. I don't love it. I don't love the plot. Like I said, it seems a little bit too much like Riverdale to me, and I was not a huge fan of Riverdale or the direction that it took in that regard, and this show seems to be headed down that kind of path. I don't love that they're using the Pretty Little Liars title. Like I said, I think it's a little tacky, a little trashy, just kind of trying to reel in the PLL audience by using that big name brand. But that said, I don't agree that it's disrespectful. I think that's crossing the line a little bit, and when it comes down to it, I don't feel I can judge until I see a cast, until I get more of a plot, and until I start seeing the first trailers and promotional materials. Then I'll make the decision if I really want to give it a try or not. But I'm certainly not going to pass judgment based on the little we have, and in general, I think it's fine if you choose to do so. If you've made up your mind that you want nothing to do with the show, that you will remain loyal to Marlene Kane and Marlene Kane only, that is your prerogative, but that doesn't mean it has to be everybody else's. So like with most other things in this fandom, what it generally comes down to for me is have your opinion and you can be as committed to it as you want, but don't expect everyone to have the same as yours. So thank you to everyone who got through this rambly video, and I will see you tomorrow with another normally scheduled voiceover.